Well, hello, everybody, and welcome back to Create Your Best Chapter. This is a podcast where I talk with really amazing women about their journeys through midlife and where I learn a lot from them as well, because we all have so much wisdom to share. And I think it's so important, especially when we're in our midlife, to really share our experiences and learn from each other. And today I have a really special guest. Her name is Dr. Rose Judy. I met Rose on LinkedIn, but she happens to be in Calgary as well. So we actually have connected in person too. And she is an expert on aging, which is such a really interesting topic because I just turned 50 a few months ago. And so aging is something that's coming to the forefront of my conversations. And I'm just really curious to have this conversation with Rose about all things aging. So, Rose, welcome to my podcast.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah. I'm really curious what got you started in this space, the space of aging. Like, how did you get into learning and studying and teaching about aging?
That is a really good question because I think it was a combination of opportunity that was available, but also somewhat personal experience as well at the same time, and interest. So when I was finishing off my master's and my PhD in New Zealand, I had an interest in ethnically diverse people who move into a society that speaks a different language and different culture and traditions, etc. And I was really interested in how they integrate and also how they develop and grow older, and the impact of that experience on their relationships with family and society. And finishing off, of course, my post-grad and then immigrating to Canada, I approached the University of Calgary and Mount Royal, back then it was a college, and I told them this is who I am and this is my area of interest and teaching interest. And I remember the UFC back then came back to me and said, we have a course called The Psychology of Aging that will be available. If you have any interest in teaching it, let us know. Now, I hadn't necessarily taught, I hadn't back then taught any specific lifespan development course in psychology, because usually I would have taught intro and social psych and child development. But because I had that interest anyway from a research perspective, I jumped on that opportunity immediately. Like, I didn't even hesitate. And from 2008 basically up to this point in 2024, teaching that course now at Mount Royal has been something that I am very proud of, and it's been a course that really has seen thousands of students go through it, and it's been very fulfilling, hopefully for them, but definitely for me as well.
Mm-hmm. What have you learned about aging then in your studies and in your work and in your teachings? Like, what's kind of the number one thing that you've learned?
What I have learned, and what actually, it didn't necessarily shock me and surprise me, but it really did make me think quite a bit about how we are navigating in our society when it comes to these topics that we find quite difficult to have a conversation about or are stigmatized, like aging and growing older. Having students who are younger in my courses, around 18 to about early 20s, 2021, it really was fascinating to see how the younger adults seem to be quite afraid of growing older. Many of them didn't have relationships with older adults in their lives, and they would open up about stereotypes that either they themselves have or they have heard around them about aging and older people and growing older. And that was actually the first day that we talk about aging. So on my first class at the university, we open up about what is the first thing that comes to mind when you hear the word older person or older adult. And then, the students would either share that openly in the class, or they'd write it down on a sticky note and we'd have it on the board. And then we kind of address why these stereotypes exist. And the aim of that first day of that sort of conversation is throughout the semester, we would be addressing in some way, in some form, some of these stereotypes and hopefully correct them. And by the end of the semester, students would be writing a reflective assignment about the way that they entered the course and their mindset and perspective around aging. And now when they've finished 4 months almost of the semester on this course, what is their way of thinking? What are their perceptions about growing older, and kind of addressing the before and the after. And it is an exercise, I think, that is very important for them to do, because it highlights also their growth and their way of thinking that might not be dramatic in its change, because we have to be realistic. You need more than just a semester of a course to change your perception on aging. However, it did show students that there is an opportunity and a chance for us to actually change our minds if we really intentionally wanted to.
I feel like maybe all of us need to take this course and think about how we can change those perceptions and those stereotypes about aging. What's the biggest stereotype that people have about aging in our society?
That it's a downhill experience, and that you have no value and worth as you grow older. And the onus really is on us as a larger society, I think. And that's where growing older and those negative stereotypes about aging and older adults intersects with the concept of ageism, which is a discrimination against a group of people because of their age. And so when you don't value a group of people and don't see worth in them, or that you don't deem them as productive or people who have something to give back and continue to want to have that need to be needed and to give back to society, and also a group of people that you deem as incapable of learning and growing and really wanting to live a continuous fulfilling life, then you assign that lesser value to, as you assign that lesser value to that group of people, you open the doors to them being discriminated against and mistreated, and almost turning a blind eye to that.
And I know, especially in our Western society, we put older people, like let's talk, like kind of really older people, into seniors' homes or other types of facilities where we don't really see them or interact with them. And so, like you said, it's almost easy as a society to not see those people. And that always fascinates me. I was really fortunate to grow up with all 4 of my grandparents, and I still have a grandma who's alive today. She's 101, which is, I find that such a blessing in my life. But, in other societies, we have elders, right? You hear about elders and how older people are revered and asked questions and really brought into the conversation as these wise guides. And I wonder how we can start to do more of that in our Western society as well, because you're so right. Like, they have so much to offer. They've gone through so many experiences, and they are still learning and capable of giving back and providing value. So I'm just curious what you think we can do as individuals to create more of that in our life.
You know what? That's also another really good question that I do get asked quite a bit. Like, okay, so we know this is a problem. What can we do about it? There are quite a few things that we can do, of course. But again, it depends on, like I said, we have to have solid intention on changing things and work on it and be continuously dedicated to the cause. And one of those things, of course, is intergenerational dialogue and conversations. So a lot of the younger adults that I would teach at the university, for example, either don't have grandparents that live with them or are alive, or they don't have maybe a relationship with them as well, right? And so when we open the doors to inviting community within our own communities, no matter what those communities look like. So I would say the university community, for example, on campus, if we open the doors to our campus to older adults from outside of that community into our classrooms, then that will open the door to people interacting with other people that they may not necessarily have opportunities to interact with in most cases. And that's one of the ways that we actually can combat stereotypes. When you have this misinformation about somebody that you've either grew up on believing this is the stereotype about them, or this is who they are, or maybe you formed those prejudgments because sometimes it's easy for us to make snap, shortcut judgments. When you sit with that group of people or that person or individual and have a conversation with them, it's a great opportunity for those stereotypes to be unraveled, hopefully, and to fill in the truth about that group and those people, as opposed to those preconceived, incorrect thoughts that we have about them. And so that's what I would recommend. It's easy to do, really. Have younger people and older people sit together and talk about things that are, and most of these conversations could be mutual interests and mutual conversations. So it's not necessarily about a particular generation. I think that would be a really good start.
Yeah, it's about being open, right, to learning about new people and not just staying in our comfort zone. It's like, we have all these conversations about diversity and being inclusive. And that means, okay, we need to talk to people who we wouldn't maybe normally talk to or interact with. And I don't consider myself old, but I know that when I taught a class at MRU last semester as well, and I love learning from the students who are 18, 19, 20, because they have such a different perspective. They grew up so differently. I don't have my own kids. So, learning from them, I was always asking them, right? Where did you get this information? What are you reading? Like, what are your thoughts on this, this, and this? Because of course, I'm in a bit of an echo chamber too with my own friends and people in my life, because we all tend to gravitate towards hanging out with people that are our own age. So I love the opportunity to talk with young people. And I'm sure they thought I was, I'm sure they think I'm old, but that's a whole other conversation. I'm curious when you think ageism starts, because I work with a lot of people who are looking for new work, they've gotten laid off, or they're looking for their next career sort of chapter. And, they're in their 40s or 50s, maybe a little bit older, and they're experiencing ageism. So when do you think that it actually starts?
That question really might be a bit hard to pinpoint, right? Because it really depends on context and eras and generations, really, and also cultural context play a huge role in this, right? I mean, if we're talking about, let's say, when do we start discriminating, which is what ageism is? I mean, part of it is discrimination. It could start as young as you being a child, really. It's a childhood where you start to I don't say, we're not born discriminatory, of course, right? But we could be raised in an environment that is discriminatory. We might be brought up in a society and a culture that is discriminatory, and therefore these things become embedded in the way that we think. However, if we want to kind of say, when will we experience ageism as individuals from other people? I mean, it could be, again, as young as, say, adolescence, for example, where, because ageism is a discrimination against a group of people because of their age, if we believe that all teenagers are problematic and troublemakers and incapable of, being social or being kind or being empathetic, then we're actually being ageist against teenagers, right? But when we're talking about, let's say, older adulthood, right? Because again, it's really interesting, because with ageism, it could happen at any stage of our human development, right? When you're a younger person, like myself, when I started teaching on the psychology of aging, I was 27. And so I had people around me within the field who would say, and some students who say, well, you're young, like, what would you know about aging and growing older? And how would you be able to teach us that? Because you're not an older person. And then again, when it comes to, let's say, as an example from a different lifespan or different stage of human development, if we were talking about employment ageism, then research has suggested that women start to experience it around their early 40s, and men would start to experience it around their early to mid 50s as well. So that would be a particular stage of human development and a particular aspect of ageism that we would experience as we grow older. And then, of course, then we experience it as we age in our 70s and 80s, when people then, excuse me, when people then tend to look at us as individuals who are no longer productive, valuable people in society, and then they tend to segregate us or not assign any value to us.
Mm-hmm.
So it really can happen at any stage of our lifespan, unfortunately.
Yeah. What are some strategies for embracing our own aging process? Because, we're all getting older, right? Doesn't matter what age you are number-wise, but the reality is that we are getting older and we're aging. So how do we start to embrace even the term aging? And then what are some strategies for embracing this process that we call aging?
I think mindset is really important. Thinking about your own aging really also is impacted and affected by quite a few other factors. In addition to your own perception and your own way of thinking about aging and growing older, because we are impacted by our own personalities and the ways that our behaviors and mannerisms, etc. But we're also impacted by the people that we surround ourselves with, in addition to our family, of course, but our larger societal interactions and connections too. So there are quite a few factors that really play a role in how we think about aging. And if you are living in an environment where, older people are valued and older people are revered and they're honored and respected, then you will think about aging in some way, in some form, as something to look forward to. But if you are surrounding yourself with people, or you are living in an environment that values youthfulness and younger people and looking youthful far more than older adults, then there is something called internalized ageism, where we will actually almost like we prevent ourselves. We really stop ourselves from thriving because we start to believe internally about these ageist stereotypes. And so one way that I would suggest is really to understand that aging and growing older is a universal experience. Everyone will grow older. We are growing older and aging right now. So when we talk about aging, we're not really just saying older adulthood. Aging is a process that we have begun from the time that we were born. And aging basically means growing and developing. And that with that comes gains, but also potential losses and declines. And so I think part of it really is just to accept the fact that life is an adventure. Life is a process that has its gains, like I said, and benefits, but also sometimes things that are changing. And maybe it's important to think about how we can adapt to those changes, as opposed to feel very sad that they have occurred. And so that mindset is very important, because the way that you think about any aspect really impacts how you feel and how you behave and react towards it too, right? Mm-hmm. And surround yourself by people who also value and embrace aging and celebrate it. And because you get it, these things rub off on you. But if you're in a situation or an environment where, or you're surrounding yourself with people who are also seeing aging as a negative, a downhill experience, there's lots of complaints about it. Not that complaints are wrong, because we sometimes do need to grieve these changes. But I think the reality is just like you said, embracing it and accepting it as part of this journey of yours, and think about what you're acquiring and accumulating in terms of stories and knowledge, and finding ways to adapt to it and live hopefully a fulfilling and thriving life despite.
Mm-hmm. I love what you said, that aging is a process of growing and developing. Like, to me, that's a mindset shift, right? Around, okay, we know through neuroplasticity, and we know that, our brains aren't just frozen in place by a certain age. Like, we can constantly be changing our level of knowledge and our education. And so I think it's up to us to create that for ourselves too. Like you said, like, create that mindset shift for us and embrace it, knowing that we can keep learning, knowing that we can keep adding value, and surrounding ourselves with those people that are really going to be supporting that. I do find what you said interesting about the grieving, and I find that myself too. I'm really cautious about saying things like, oh, I'm getting old, or that's why my back hurts, or I can't do that, I'm too old. Like I find myself sometimes falling into those old patterns. And so I really need to stop myself. But there is a part of it that we're letting go of certain things. Like physically, there are certain things that we're not able to do anymore. And there's also things that we don't want to do anymore. So there's some things I don't want to do anymore that maybe I did want to do when I was 25. And there is that sort of grieving process. And I've talked with a few, other women friends specifically about we needed some sort of ceremony, right? Like we don't have that in our society where you're going into a different phase of your life. And part of that is letting go of like who we were, where we were, what we're able to do, and being excited and looking forward to all the new things that are being open to us, because we get to do different things when we're older, right? We have a different opinion on things, or sometimes we feel more confident. A lot of times we feel more confident, right? We don't care as much what other people think about us. So, and we know ourselves a lot more. So yes, there's a letting go, but to your point, there's also all these things that we can really be excited about and look forward to.
Absolutely. And you're absolutely right as well in terms of, the whole concept of accepting that changes are occurring and that they are universal and not just unique to you necessarily. For some people that might be helpful, but for others they go, well, I still don't care. I'm thinking about me. And I think part of my hope is, though, to have when having conversations about growing older and aging, is that we don't really shame people in allowing them to feel what they want to feel, right? I would always say, for example, to my girlfriends or even my kids, I say, just feel the feels, right? If you're feeling really upset and quite ticked off about what's happening, I think you should. I think preventing people or shaming them or embarrass, or making them feel embarrassed to express how they feel is not what we should be doing. But to say, okay, it's all right for you to feel the fear. Yeah, it sucks to grow older and now you're slowing down, or you're not looking the same way that you looked, let's say, a decade ago. But to your point, after you feel those feels and you acknowledge them, what are we going to do now about it? Like, how are we going to move on? And I think that's really important, is that we don't carry the baggage and the luggage and all that strain and stress of, or the fears, but just to go, okay, how are you going to live through this with these changes? And when you look at older people who are thriving, they usually have a better quality of life, better mental and physical health, despite the chronological age that they have, because they are people who are far more optimistic, hopeful. They have found purpose. They are doing meaningful things. They do feel valued and honored and respected as older adults. And in fact, they have a 7.5-year opportunity to live longer than people who have negative, pessimistic thoughts about growing older. So that's research. Your perception about aging and growing older could actually help you live longer by 7.5 years. And so I usually kind of say that to my students at the forefront of the course to help, set the tone to, this isn't a conversation about making aging look unrealistic. This is a conversation about talking about the realistic changes that occurs as we grow older, but also thinking about the then what and how can we embrace and adapt it, and how despite these changes, it's really not the end, and that there is opportunities and chances for us to continue to thrive and live a fulfilling life despite this age, with the chronic conditions, with the changes, with the other stuff that comes with growing older. But there is definitely always a way. But I think sometimes, and this is normal, that we might need a bit of support and a bit of maybe awareness and education on what the next steps are.
Absolutely. And that's why I love what you're doing, Rose, is because you are bringing attention to this topic to young people, and I mean to people of all ages. But it's also why I really wanted to have this conversation with you, because sometimes we feel like we're alone in going through something, and you hit it bang on when you said we need the support around us, right? Like we need people around us who are like-minded, who are going to pull us out on those days when we're not feeling so good, who are holding space for us to feel our feelings, right? Which is so important. And then who help us carry on, right? And tap into the gifts and the lessons that we can share with the world as we age. So I acknowledge you for the work that you're doing. I really appreciated this conversation. It's definitely given me something to think about, like how I approach aging and how I define it and what I can do about it and how I'm embracing it as I move forward. So thank you so much, Rose, for sharing your wisdom with us.
Thank you so much for having me and for listening.
Yeah, of course. We'll talk to you later.
Thank you so much.